Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next segment with author Darren Perry, we're going to visit a monument donated by the state of Idaho to tell the Shoshone story of the Bear River Massacre. Unfortunately, it was really windy that day and the audio cut out. So in this next conversation, I've had Darren kind of re-narrate it. So you'll notice if you're watching it on video that the words don't always match the dialogue because we had to re-record the audio. But it's a fantastic episode. We're going to visit some kiosks and learn more about the Shoshone tribe. And Darren tells us some amazing stories. So you definitely won't want to miss this. And if you want to see the entire interview uninterrupted, make sure you sign up at youtube.com/gospeltangents or at gospeltangents.com. Click on the yellow subscribe button. Or you can go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for just $8 a month, you can see this entire interview uninterrupted. So it's a fantastic interview. And now we're going to go back to our conversation with the second memorial here in southern Idaho. All right. Well, one of the things I'd like to do, we went up in November and my audio cut out on one of the segments. So I'd like to show that to you.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of re-narrate it, basically.
Sounds good.
And so here we are at the first kiosk.
I love bringing people up here because the state of Idaho helped us develop the 7 kiosks here to tell the story of our people from our perspective. And that's the first time we've been able to do that. But Niwa, that N-E-W-E means the people. That's what the Shoshones, how they refer to themselves. And that's who we've always called themselves. Sometimes the pioneers called us the Snake Indians, and we've been referred to as other things. But to us and the Shoshone people, we're always Niwa. That's how it's pronounced. Beautiful people. There's a picture, that top left one is of Little Soldier. Little Soldier hung out in Tooele, but when he was up in this area, he spent his time along the Weaver River. He actually carried a poster, a sign in the Ogden City Parade that said, "The Thousands of Manasseh." And so, it's funny. I'm sure he had no idea what that meant, or he couldn't even read English, but the fact that the saints thought that the Shoshone people were from the tribe of Manasseh spoke volumes.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's quite a heritage there. And so he probably wouldn't have done it had he known. They were taking advantage of him. So, but really, it's just who we are, how we lived there, and such an important part of how we traveled, what we ate, our hunter-gatherer lifestyle, where we hunted buffalo, that cyclical travel pattern to collect food was always a big part. And so when I bring Chinese tour groups and other places to this beautiful site, it's just important that they get, from our perspective, who we are, how we lived, and how we lived in this environment and what it all meant and stood for.
I'm trying to remember. It seems like when we were talking about this last time, you had mentioned something along the lines of, there were no fences. Shoshone didn't build any fences. And so when they came across like cattle and things, they were like, hey, that looks like food to us. You didn't recognize the fences at all, right?
No, there were no fences, and the pioneers brought fences and cabins and everything else. And to the Shoshone people, it was always everybody's land was everybody's land. There wasn't, this is ours, that's theirs. The whole community shared in whatever they needed to survive. And you were only as strong as a community as your most vulnerable people within that community. And so we lived a sense of taking care of one another.
Now, I think at this point you were talking about somebody coming over. Was it
Connor's Overlook is
Okay.
what I was pointing to. There's a group of trees over there on that bluff. And so that's where Connor and his men first appeared on the bluff. They were led by a Mormon scout named Porter Rockwell. He knew where the Shoshones were camped. And for $5, he was hired by the troops in Salt Lake to bring him to that point. And so the village would have been over there more to the right. But that's called Connor's Overlook today.
And you said it was below zero, and so it was a moving fog where the horses were?
Yeah, more than 4 feet of snow that day from Pioneers' journals. They said it was probably the coldest winter in Cache Valley in some time. And so there was a steaming mist on that edge of the rim there that Sagwitch first noticed when he got up that morning. And it looked like a cloud, it looked like a steaming mist. And so that's where they were first noticed. And that mist appeared to start lowering down that mountain. And then Sagwitch really realized what it was taking place, that the soldiers from Camp Douglas had arrived. The kiosk here just talks about Bia Ogai or Big River. And that's what it really, we called the Bear River Big River. And you notice sometimes we say it Bia Ogai or Bo Ogai. They're the same. Just the National Park Service referred to us in many of their publications as Boa Ogai as a part to Bia. Bia means big in Shoshone. So that's probably more of the accurate term. But here we're just showing where the villages were, where the troops forded the river to attack the village. And so we begin to tell this story of survival and how really ill-prepared the Shoshone were for this massacre. I've called it battle before. I've said before what may have started as a battle quickly turned into a wholesale massacre. But a battle, to me, as I think about it, tends to tell you that there were two sides that were eagerly engaged in this conflict, and that wasn't the case at all in this instance. And so I'm going to stop using, the battle to prelude what ended up actually happening. But it was a massacre from the very beginning. 18 soldiers died that day, and we believe more than 400 Shoshone men, women, and children were massacred that morning. So,
since you mentioned that, I remember when we were talking about this, I said that Will Bagley had said it was only 2 to 250. And what's the discrepancy there?
Well, and a lot of historians say that. And Will's right. From what was reported, Connor only reported 230 to 250 massacred. But in his field notes, he put bucks only. And so what that tells me is he only counted the men that were massacred that day. I don't think his report to his superiors in Washington, D.C. would have reflected well on him if he'd counted the women and babies and the children that were massacred that day. That wouldn't have reflected very well on him and his service. So he only reported the men that were massacred that day. So that number has kind of been etched in history as the number, when in fact it wasn't the number at all.
And so there were really about 4 bands there all at the same time?
Yeah, 4 bands that were there all at the same time. If Connor would have attacked a few weeks earlier, Washakie would have been there, Pocatello would have still been there. There would have been about 2,000 Shoshones 2 weeks earlier.
Oh, wow.
To perform the worm dance. That's why they were there. But they'd all left prior to the massacre. So as we progress down this path and progress to the other kiosks, we just are trying to tell a story about a way of life that the Shoshones lived in this area, how they hunted and gathered and collected for the winter season. You better have done your job throughout the year, so by the time you got to Bear River, and this area in particular, you've saved enough food sources to get you through the winter. We always say the winter is the elders' time to tell stories and to sit down and renew friendships with cousins you probably hadn't seen for a while. And so that's kind of the type of life that they lived. Just a wonderful time of rest in a time that they'd worked so hard throughout the year to gather everything that they'd need to survive. You know, you think about it, the Shoshone only knew their way of life. And I mean, they'd met mountain men, you know, in the early 1820s and 30s. But those men, you know, corresponded and did business with the Shoshone and always left. I think what the pioneers brought, I think Sagwitch had a clear idea that this group of people were not going to leave. And so just two different worlds, two different cultures.
I think at this point I had asked you if Shoshones were the original people who lived the law of consecration.
Absolutely they were. And in fact, in a lot of respects, they still try to live it today if they're on a reservation. There was no poor among any of them. Or you could say they were all poor. I mean, as far
all rich and all poor, right?
If you were counting, you know, worldly possessions as being rich, but they took care of the most vulnerable, and that's what I love. And even when I ran for office, that was such a big deal to me. My grandmother would say, "Our community is only as strong as our most vulnerable," and so when there was always a need within that community, the needs were always met immediately by the whole tribe. They took care of the most vulnerable in that group. And so there was no vulnerable. And if there was a hunger need, then things were provided to make sure that everybody had what they needed to survive. No more, no less. And so, yes, the law of consecration was certainly practiced among our people for centuries. Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
Well, so the other thing that I remember us talking about was at the time, I think there was only about 500 Shoshones in the area, and then 3,000 Mormons came into Cache Valley, and so that made it really all the more harder for the Shoshones to survive.
Yeah, they were taking the same resources that we need. They hunted deer and elk and the bison, and they fished the streams, and so they collected the berries in the mountains and the seeds that were available. So yeah, when you think about it in that way, it was always easy for our people in a small number to live sustainable lives and not harvest just everything. They would leave things for people that would come later. And so that lifestyle was easier to practice in small groups. You could do that. Now you bring in thousands of Mormons. They're competing for the same resource. They don't have the same values that the Shoshone people had as far as taking care of Mother Earth and making sure that something was left behind for the next people that would come through. So that way of life just led to really conflict between the two groups of people who really led two different lifestyles.
Interesting. Now, I have a note here about Chief Pocatello, and it says he hung out City of Rocks, and I can't remember what that means.
Yeah, well, Pocatello was a northwestern Shoshone. If you go to Fort Hall Reservation today up by Pocatello, a lot of those Shoshones that are there in Bannock, they think that Pocatello is one of their own. And the natives that live at Fort Hall or Shoshone Bannock, there are two different groups of Indians from the Boise, Idaho area. They were moved there in the late 1870s to present-day Pocatello. but Pocatello was part of our band. But he lived with his group more in really extreme northwestern Box Elder County. So over past Snowville, up in that Raft River Mountain area, and the city of Rocks, which is actually in Idaho. But that area was where he frequented quite a bit. And then obviously the Pocatello, Idaho area is where he spent most of his time. But he was certainly down in Cache Valley quite a bit. They wintered at Bear River because of the hot springs and the geothermal that's in that area. You could always get a warm bath, and in a lot of instances, the snow never collected on the grasses, and so the horses had plenty to eat through the winter months without having to work too hard. And so that's what made it such a perfect place to live, and a perfect place to die as well. So.
Now, my mom grew up in a little city called Blackfoot, Idaho. I'm sure that's named after an Indian.
It is.
So what can you tell me about Blackfoot?
Well, the Blackfeet, we have more oral history. They were the Shoshone's enemy.
Oh, really?
The Blackfeet were very aggressive.
Because that's right near Pocatello.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think the Blackfeet were more central to eastern Idaho, more so than any other place, but they frequented the area because the trappers, you could get to Bear Lake and the Bear Lake Valley from here easily. And there were a lot of mountain men rendezvous that happened in the Bear Lake area and happened in the south end of Cache Valley. Cache Valley is named after Cache. It was a place of trade. It's a place where the original trappers would meet with the Indians and trade wares, trade for furs and trade for pots and pans and rifles and other things. So
my son Preston is about 11 years old and he loves money, and so he thought it was CASH, Cache Valley, instead of CACHE.
Yeah, that's awesome. But this valley was a huge important area for business between the trappers and the local Native American groups. And the Blackfoot would have come down for those things, but they were much more aggressive, and they were very aggressive in taking care of the Shoshone and fighting when they could and taking what they wanted.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with author Darren Perry. He's the author of the Bear River Massacre. In our next conversation, we're going to stay here at the second site here in Idaho, and we'll talk about some of the international visitors that have come to visit and learn more about the Bear River Massacre.
Nobody ever comes here anyway. And I said, oh, that's not true. I meet Chinese tour buses here, and I meet people from all over the world, frankly, on any given day. And they're going, yeah, they're being nice to me. But a car pulls up, and a couple gets out, and the guy, they're looking around, and they have a book in their hands. And they're looking around going, they looked lost. So I walked over and just said, can I help you? And they started speaking French to me. They didn't speak any English at all. And I thought, and he motions to this book he had in his hand. And it was a book. He was from Paris. He wrote this book about the Bear River Massacre. He'd heard about the massacre earlier in his childhood. And he wrote this book and he illustrated this book. And he was there to leave a copy of the book right there in the weeds, or he didn't know what else to do with it.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruptions. If you'd like to see the whole video, that's just $8 a month, and you can sign up either at youtube.com/gospeltangents or on our website at gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button. Or you can go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and I'll just need to make sure that we're Facebook friends, and I'll add you to our insiders group, and you can see the entire interview uncut. If you'd like to get PDF transcripts of our interviews, those are just $10 a month. And for just $15 a month, I will send you paperback versions of our transcripts as soon as they come out. Or, of course, you can buy them on Amazon as well. Go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see all of our transcripts there. Don't forget to sign up for our updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Of course, you can follow us at Gospel Tangents on Twitter. To hear our interviews updated to your podcast player, go to tinyurl.com/gospeltangents and make sure you give us a 5-star review. And of course, you should show your support for Gospel Tangents with one of these cool t-shirts like this green one, or light blue, sport gray, royal blue, purple, of course black, beautiful gold, and of course Utah red. I've probably left out some colors, but if you want to see more, go to gospeltangents.com/shop and you can get one of these. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.